Welcome, biology students. At this point, please make sure you have the notes that you should have picked up from the pickup bin, because what we are going to do is talk about how to classify if you have decided if something is a living organism, and you know that from looking at your characteristics of life notes. Please make sure along the way you pause if you need to write down something, or make sure you go back if you need to hear something again. All right, in our notes, first thing we want to write down is the scientist by the name of Linnaeus. He is known for coming up with the first naming system for living things, something that most scientists could use. Interesting fact about Linnaeus: he was a Christian. So he believed that all living things were created, and then from there he used this classification system to make it easier for them to study. In other words, we would say he is the father of taxonomy. Definition of taxonomy is the science of naming living things. Again, it is the science of naming living things. So what you see here on this page is actually kind of the order of classification. If you look down at letter D, you have these different Roman numeral letters you can fill in. So when we talk about the levels of classification, so we're kind of skipping over letter C right now. We'll go back to it later. The levels are based on Linnaeus. The most general level, so this would be letter I, is kingdom. And then you have phyla, class, order, family, genus, species. So you'll notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 7 places for you to put that. So kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. One easy way to remember this is King Philip. I won't write this all in, but King Philip came over for good soup. One easy way to remember the most general to the most specific when we go to classify an organism. So the reason why this is important is when you look at an organism, in this case a leopard, we have to start up here identifying the kingdom, then we have to figure out its phyla, then its class, then its order. So as we work our way down, we get more and more specific, which is actually what we're going to talk about now with letter C. And this is where the naming system comes in. The naming system is called binomial nomenclature. And I'm actually going to move to a new slide to show you how this works. So binomial nomenclature, it's a two-part naming system. Why again is it important to classify first? Well, when you name an organism, you use the last two levels, which are the genus and the species. So by definition, a genus is just a group of organisms with similar characteristics. So again, a genus, a group of organisms with similar characteristics. Whereas the species is a description of the genus. And so that can get a little interesting when you are trying to figure out which two organisms are most closely related. So what we have here, these are what we call the scientific name. So this is the scientific name. And the scientific name consists of the genus and the species. But you want to be careful when trying to decide which two organisms are most closely related. So I'm actually going to write down a couple names here. We have, let's say, Acer rubrum. By the way, when you write a scientific name, capitalize the first letter of the genus, everything else lowercase, and then underline the rest, or you can italicize. So Acer rubrum, this would be, Acer is the genus and rubrum is the species. Now what we mean by species is the description. Rubrum means red, Acer means maple, so it's the red maple. if I had something like a ser, let's say Tito, something like that. Well, here's another maple, and this would just be another description of that particular genus. But what if I had something like this? Alba Tito. By the way, I'm just making up things right now. Okay, you would say, oh, look, these two are probably most closely related. Nah, they just have the same genus. So you have to look, I'm sorry, they have the same species name, so same description. You have to look at the genus to decide which two are most closely related. And Alba is nothing related to Acer. Okay, and so therefore we would say these two are most closely related. But of course, science is always changing, always, always, always. And so now there's this whole new thing before the kingdom, and it's something called a domain. So we are now jumping back down to Roman numeral number 2. So if we were to do the levels of classification now, we would put domain first, then we would put kingdom, and then we would go from there. So phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So domain comes first. In your notes, it has a space for 3 places because there are 3 domains. Domain bacteria, domain archaea, and domain eukarya. Next to each one of these in your notes, you might want to jot down some important information. One is domain bacteria is our true bacteria, meaning bacteria you come in contact with in your everyday life, like the bacteria that lives in your stomach or the bacteria on your hands, even the bacteria that makes you sick. This is like your common bacteria. Key thing we know already about bacteria, they have no nucleus or other major organelles, and also they are unicellular. Now, kind of similar to domain bacteria is a domain called domain archaea. Now, they're also a type of bacteria, but they live in extreme environments. So we're talking about bacteria that you don't come in contact with in your everyday life. So they too are prokaryotic, no nucleus, and they are also unicellular. So they would look a lot like this group, except they live in extreme environments. So we have things like halophiles. You may remember halite, which is a salty mineral. They live in extreme salt. We have thermophiles. They live in extreme heat. We have things like methanogens. Sorry, it might be hard. I'm squeezing it in there. Methanogens, they live in the gut of cows. They live where there's high gas and methane. We have things like acidophiles that live in low pH. So all these different kinds of bacteria that live in these extreme environments. And then lastly, we have our domain called domain eukarya. And this is where we put all of our eukaryotic organisms, all of our organisms that have a nucleus. And so of the 5 kingdoms we're going to talk about, 4 of the kingdoms will fit under this domain.